You're listening to the Dennis and Tommy Show, coming to you each and every week.
Each and every week.
And this past week has certainly been historical, wouldn't you say?
I call it hysterical.
That's probably a better word for it. The United States of America has taken a huge step forward in our descent towards, if you want to call it a fascism, or as you say, feudalism.
No, it'll be a democracy. What are you talking about?
Yeah, it's not even a democracy. Essentially, what we have in this country, for our Russian listeners, which they're probably going to be very familiar. Well, actually, they wouldn't be familiar with this because
why is it for our Russian listeners then?
Well, I was going to say that they may be,
like it's more for our Cuban listeners.
It's not even that.
It really is.
No, it's not, because that is run by a government bureaucracy. What we have now is a bit different in that the federal government is going to tax you, okay, like any other tax. You're going to be taxed, but rather than the income generated from that tax being returned back into the federal government, it will be diverted towards private corporations.
It's
a difference.
You know as well as I do that as the money comes through, first of all, the IRS is going to get their cut.
Of course they are. The federal government will get their cut too.
That's my point. So it's not going directly to the healthcare
But the majority of it is going to the corporations.
We don't know that. That's just all this conjecture.
No, it's not. It's fact. It's in the bill. And here's the other thing.
What's in the bill? Wait a minute. Don't say things. What's in the bill?
That you have to have insurance.
No. We're talking about diversion of funds. Where is that?
Oh, it's in there.
Is it?
Yes, it is. Go look it up.
Why do I have to look it up? You're the one saying it.
Because I'm the one that says I know that it's there. You don't know, so if you want to find out, you can either believe me, or if you don't, go look it up and find it out for yourself.
Oh, because so much work you give me to do.
Work. But more, bigger than that even is the fact that the federal government now can tell a private citizen that they're forcing a private citizen to enter into a contract with a private corporation.
Oh, it's not even about that. What they're doing is they're telling you have to pay for not doing something. If you don't have insurance, you have to pay money. If you have insurance, you don't have to pay anything.
And where does it end from here? If the federal government can tell you to buy that, they can tell you to buy anything.
But that's what I'm saying. So what might happen, and what's already happened, is, for example, there's a Christian coalition that has it that you can be under their umbrella, and they charge very little money, and you're covered.
Oh, and there are over 733 corporations that are exempt from all this, that Obama exempted, and every single one of them are donors to his campaign. So, see, it's not even equal.
Right.
There's so many unconstitutional things here that it is absolutely amazing that the Supreme Court said this is constitutional.
Well, yeah, I understand that, and I understand that's where we're at. I'm just thinking about the entrepreneurial niches that arise, as they say in China, opportunity from crisis. So it's a crisis. So the opportunity is if a coalition can be formed that can insure the uninsured for a lower cost than you would pay to the government, and you might say to yourself, well, why weren't they doing that before? They were. It's just that nobody was interested in doing it.
And, of course, if it becomes too much of a problem for the corporations, they'll figure out a way to shut it down. Or the government will shut it down. The corporations will get the government to shut them down. It's just the way. That's where we are today. And people need to understand that. We are in a tyranny. And it's time to rise up. That's all I have to say. It's time to rise up against the tyranny. Otherwise, they're going to keep giving it to you, and you're going to keep taking it. And how long are you going to do that? At what point are you going to say this is enough? Don't know.
Okay. Well, and on the flip side, it's not the end of the road. Just because the Supreme Court said something doesn't mean the law can't be repealed. Of course, that brings up a bigger issue, which is even if the law is repealed, the precedent has been set that you don't really have to run things by the Supreme Court because they already said what's constitutional and what's not. Makes it easier to fly, but you can repeal it, but repeal requires a signature, and the current president's not going to sign that, so that means we have to really flush out everything.
Yeah, because what's really interesting is how you now end up with a Supreme Court who does unconstitutional things. That's where we are now.
Well, they don't do unconstitutional.
Well,
they didn't perform an unconstitutional act.
No, they are ruling incorrectly. And like I think you mentioned this earlier, I guess it wasn't on the recording, that now that the Supreme Court has said something, that's now doctrine.
Well,
you have to follow what they say.
It's precedent.
Yeah, you're not even allowed to say, well, that's really not right.
Now, one of the things that happened, of course, was the Chief Justice decided that so he could look good, so he wouldn't look like he was giving in and caving in, he caved in. That's what he did. He didn't want to look like he was giving in to, not a public opinion, but he didn't want to be giving in to a license that the Supreme Court should rule against legislation that went through a heavy process merely on the idea that the will of the American people wasn't being countenanced, or in other words, that it was unconstitutional. That definition being constitutional, that it's by the will of the people, meaning that the law wouldn't have been enacted if the representatives that weren't elected by the people didn't vote on it. But there's, of course, the major issue with that is we know that the health care bill was not passed by the will of the people, not just because of public polls, but because we know there was a lot of arm twisting and bribery. These things have come out, that people made trades, who were horse trading, and we know that there are people who voted that have their own corruption hearings going on. So some of these people were corrupted in the beginning. Well, you take a Charlie Rangel, he's got his own issues.
Yeah.
And we know from private conversations that were caught on microphone that these people absolutely said that this is only the beginning.
Yeah.
So this is more of an agenda than a legislation.
It really is. And I think, a couple of things. First of all, I finally heard on our local talk radio show here them discussing the fact that this bill originated in the Senate, and that alone is unconstitutional because of the fact that it generates taxes. And any bill that's going to generate taxes has to originate in the House.
Well,
now, the conversation did go that they didn't know if there was some parliamentary procedure that was put in place that allowed them to do that.
That's number one. There are parliamentary procedures, but the bigger issue is this. If it was unconstitutional, the House should have kiboshed it by not amending it or allowing it. So what happens is the Supreme Court has to rule on whether or not the House had permission to go forward with a bill that came in from the Senate. And the way something is structured, was it really a bill, or was it just an offering that the House made into a bill? And that's the way I remember it.
That's a good point. No, that's
way
a
I
very
remember
good point.
it.
But what this really all boils down to, and again, this is something you said off air, at least I think it was off air, is the fact that we, the people, are ultimately responsible for this. We have a representative government in place. Okay, we are electing representatives. The problem is the representatives that are being elected by a small minority. So we truly don't have representation. We have an oligarchy.
When you have, in a primary, even tops in some precincts 40, 50%, but there are lows of down in 2, 3, 4%. These people pick who the candidates are going to be. From the primary comes your candidate. Then even in the general elections, if it's an off year, you're not going to get 50% on some of these things. Now this year we had a large turnout on primary because of the marriage amendment in North Carolina, so a lot of people voted just for that.
Yeah.
So we had 40s and 50s, which was good, but a lot of people voted for the amendment and didn't vote for anything else. So you're still looking at...
Is that true? I don't know if that's true.
Yeah, you're still looking at low numbers, like 30s, which is a little bit higher than it was. But the problem is, once the candidate is in by a minority, your candidates then is... Your choice is set by minority.
Yeah, that's what I say. You're voting for someone who was selected by the minority.
Now, out of the two candidates, if even 50% come up, the other 50% are ruled by that 50%.
Yeah, so even in the general election, which we know is typically under 50%, those two candidates are still being selected by a minority. It's just incredible.
And you know that my platform on voting has been that we should have mandatory voting like they do in Chile or in Australia. And of course,
Obama said that too.
Obama did not say. Some spokesman for him recently came out and discussed
Well,
it.
he represents Obama.
And then it was discussed in some of the media, some of the alternative media, about how this was a bad idea because it came from Obama. But the problem is, that's the spin you could put on it, is they know mandatory voting would be great, and so they floated mandatory voting so it would be struck down by alternative media, so people like you and me would think it's bad. But see, I already come in predisposed for mandatory voting. So when they say it, I don't go, oh, they're good guys. I know they're bad guys. The only reason they're saying what I'm saying, they don't change my mind to be on their side, is that I know they're floating something to discredit something good that I believe in.
And of course,